Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello, Rob. It's Gonzalo from Europa Press, a news agency in Spain. First of all, how are you? Fine, thank you. Well, first of all, I have to recognize you because I'm not a horror movie person, and you scared the hell out of me. So I guess the movie is great because of that. Yeah. Well, now I want to ask you first of all, how did this project came to you? I mean, how did you receive it? What did captivate you about it? Because it's a Stephen King story, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I knew the short story from reading it as a kid, and it had. I mean, all of his short stories really messed me up as a kid. This one especially. So I had that in the back of my head when I was reading this script, and it was a movie that got sent to me after I made this movie called Host back in 2020, which was a movie we shot during lockdown, all via Zoom, and it ended up blowing up in a big way, and I got offered every single script in town, most of them not very good, and then this one came through. It had Stephen King's name on it. It was a story that I recognized. It was the draft that I read originally was by Beck and Woods, who obviously wrote A Quiet Place and exceptional writers. So it was a bit of it was a no-brainer. And I read the script, and even though we ended up developing it into something very different from where that script started out, I could immediately see the potential for this movie and the challenge of making kind of the definitive Boogeyman movie, because there's been a lot of Boogeyman movies and a lot of bad Boogeyman movies, and to make the one good one was a worthy challenge.
I guess you felt a lot of responsibility, right? Especially because it's such a known text, such a known story.
Yeah, well, responsibility to the source text, and also it's a movie that is based on a short story that's very slight. It's two characters in a room talking, and then it's got a shocking twist ending, and it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a big 90-minute movie, and so a lot of the movie was our own invention. We were building this movie out and trying to stay true to King and trying to stay true to his voice, and making sure that even the stuff that we were inventing wholesale felt like it belonged in the Stephen King universe, and that it would stand shoulder to shoulder with It and The Shining and all the classic movies that already exist in that world.
Mm-hmm. And first of all, I think it was going to be released in streaming, right?
On Hulu, yes.
Yeah. So I would like to know, how did you react? I guess it was amazing when they told you that it was going to be on the big screen. But while directing it, do you have to take different decisions? If you are...
Yeah. No, I've only ever done that once, which is when I was working on Host, because everyone was in lockdown and I wanted people to watch that on their laptop screen, which I'll never say that again, but that was the one time when that's true. No, I think every filmmaker really makes their film for the big screen. They always think in terms of the cinema, and I kind of always thought in the back of my head that if this movie was well made enough and that we pulled it off, that it could potentially go to the big screen. Movies like Smile and Barbarian had already gone to the big screen from streaming. And, I felt with Stephen King and this title, we had a chance. So I aimed always for the big screen.
Yeah, I think it has to do great in the big screen. It will scare people. So
yeah. Well, I hope so.
Now, about that, I want to ask you because nowadays people are talking a lot of things about the streaming cinema, if it's killing cinema on the big screen. What's your opinion about that? Do you feel that this situation has to change, or cinema will survive and will still be as it has always been? Or
I think the world is going to change a lot in the next decade. I think cinema will always endure. I don't think streaming is killing cinema. I think there's a place for movies that you watch in your household, and there's a place for movies that you want to watch on a big screen with a crowd, and also like Netflix made The Irishman, which is one of the great cinema experiences I've had in recent years. I think there's it's not as black and white as people like to discuss it.
Yeah, I like that opinion. Well, in the movie, the father is a psychologist, but I found something very interesting because he can't provide their daughters the tools in order to get over the death of their mother. Nowadays, there is a real conversation about mental health in terms of especially teenagers. So, what do you think that has changed about that, and what do you think that still has to change?
Well, I think part of this movie, this is a movie that's about a family going through the grieving process, and they're struggling to go through it. They're struggling to work through it because they're all going through it alone. They're finding it hard to communicate, and I think part of what this movie is about, there's been a lot of grief horror movies, and I think the way that this is different is it's really about talking, and it's about listening, and it's about hearing other people as they're going through periods of darkness in their lives, and that speaks to mental health and the ultimately the message and the metaphor of the movie is the idea that we can't get through these periods of darkness alone. We've got to lean on each other, and we've got to talk, and we've got to speak to it, because otherwise, if you don't speak to it, it stays deep within, and it festers, and it turns into something that could become monstrous and ugly. And that's really what the creature represents. It's everything that's not spoken about that really needs to be exposed to the light.
Yeah, I mean, as I told you, I'm not a horror movie person, and while watching it, I was like, okay, this is a great, interesting point that's not really often. It's not really often in horror movies, I guess. So that's great. Now I want to ask you about the differences between a horror story in text written and a horror story translated to the movie, to the images. So in order to create the same feeling, what's the difference? How do you have to work on it?
I think you've just got a different tool set, that you have to use different language. I think oftentimes it's a very similar thing. I think in writing, the thing that you've got that you don't have in film is you've got the ability to take the audience inside of your character's thought process, inside of their, you can describe the feeling they have deep within that they're hiding, whereas in a movie, you've got to visualize that. And one of the things that I was always trying to do in Boogeyman was make it feel as subjective as possible, lock the audience into the experience of the kid looking under the bed, make us feel like we're there with the character. And, it doesn't ever really work to have an inner monologue or a voiceover or anything like that. That's really a literary technique. But I think there are certain ways that you can align the audience with your character and get maximum fear out of the audience.
Nice. Now I want to ask you, because as you see, I have a baby Yoda there. I'm a Star Wars fan. So I want to ask you, the whole cast is amazing, but I want to ask you Vivian Legrand, because she has like 10 years old. She's 10 years old. And
She was 9 when we shot this. 9, yeah.
so while directing it, I guess you see that. I guess you see that talent is there.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's one of the most incredible actors I've ever worked with, and even at 9, I mean, she's been working for a long time. She was in Bird Box when she was like 6 years old. She's her control of her craft is really impeccable. You can really speak to her on the level that you would an adult actor, and she's able to dial in her performance with such precision. And at first I thought I'd have to be talking to her like any other kid actor, but by the end, I was talking to her the same as I would an actor 3 times her age.
I mean, she's amazing. Now I think I have time still for another question. I want to ask you about something that is going on in Hollywood right now, which is sadly the writers' strike. So I just want to know your opinion, your position about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I support the writers. I think the industry is changing, and it's going to be changing very dramatically over the next few years. And I think it's we've got to create an industry that's fair and works for everyone. And I think that's what the writers are fighting for. And I think it's reasonable. And I'm hoping that it gets resolved quickly and in their favor.